Last week, tragedy struck as 2 men were killed and a third was injured on a MAX train in Portland, Oregon. The attacker, Jeremy Christian, had been harassing and intimidating 2 women on the train. Now that more information is available, I wanted to take a look at what happened to try and understand it. Who is Jeremy Christian? Why did the attack occur? Could it have been prevented? Hopefully I can answer these questions and more in this deep dive on the Portland, Oregon MAX attack. Who is Jeremy Christian? Jeremy Christian is a 35-year-old resident of Portland, Oregon, with no permanent address, having previously lived with his parents. Christian dropped out of high school in the 9th grade, but did acquire his GED. Despite this, he did not have a job, and based off his Facebook page, seemingly had no interest in getting one. Christian is also a 3-time convicted felon. In 2002, he was sentenced to 90 months in prison for armed robbery of a Portland convenience store. Christian not only robbed the store, but held the owner at gunpoint, threatened to shoot him, and cuffed him to a metal bar in the store. Christian then fled where he was pursued by police. Christian allegedly pointed his gun at the ensuing officers, and one officer reportedly shot Christian in the face. Christian later said he robbed the store because they did not sell winning lottery tickets. This caused his mother to report that he was an addict to marijuana and that he possibly had mental health problems. In 2011, Christian was convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm and sentenced to time served plus 3 years. He then violated the terms of his release several times. Finally, in 2013, he was sentenced to another 9 months in custody. Christian seems rather proud of his felon status, and I think this stems from his total nihilism. A surface look at Christian's Facebook page and his actions in real life seem to indicate someone who is a neo-Nazi. Video footage shows him goose-stepping while doing a Nazi salute, and his Facebook page shows him spewing Nazi rhetoric. However, the real picture is a bit more complicated. On his Facebook, he seems to have friends of different nationalities that he was more than capable of having a regular conversation with. According to Robert Moon, a Native American, Christian was a loyal friend, but someone who was unstable and with mental health issues. Another acquaintance of his, Brandy Leach, observed that his turn to the alt-right seemed more about finding a safe space to express his hatred than it was about actually being racist. Even further, from this Facebook post Christian shared, he seems to have agreed with a comparison about Antifa basically being Nazis, and Antifa being fascism. He has a clear disdain for Antifa, so if he were a Nazi, why compare himself to those he hates? I think the answer to this stems from Christian's extremist views on the First Amendment. Let's be very clear on what the First Amendment actually says, because Christian's interpretation is wrong for many reasons. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Christian's interpretation of the First Amendment is that it gives everyone true freedom of speech. To him, true freedom of speech seems to be the ability to say anything, anywhere, at any time, to anyone, without repercussion. In theory, freedom of speech should allow people to say whatever they want. However, there are some obvious exceptions to this. For example, shouting fire in a crowded building. This could cause panic and chaos and therefore harm to many people, and therefore would go against their rights. Another would be threatening someone with physical harm, especially in the case about whether or not they're going to talk on an issue. Threatening someone and incapacitating their ability to speak through threats is a violation of their First Amendment right, even if you want to try and say it's protected under your own. And so in each of these cases, a limitation on what one can say is in effect, because what one can say can put limitations on what another can say or do. And this is clearly not something Christian understands. Because of his extremist free speech belief, and possibly spurred on by his mental instability, Christian felt he had the right to say anything he wanted, yet clearly could not handle the repercussions of his actions. In an interaction on Facebook, Christian explains why he believes Patrick Stupfel, a conservative free speech advocate and founder of the Millennials for Solidarity nonprofit, is not a true free speech advocate. This is because Stubfeld refused to heil free speech and then called Christian a racist. From his response, Christian seems rather upset by the whole ordeal, offended that someone would call him a racist rather than play along. Besides his extremist view on free speech, what are Christian's political and philosophical beliefs? To start, Christian most likely is not a Nazi or neo-Nazi, or even alt-right. He first supported Bernie and was strongly anti-Hillary and Trump, but then switched to Trump when Bernie lost. He has since moved away from Trump again. He shares posts from the Libertarian Party most often, it seems, but I think the real truth of his political beliefs are in his posts. I think the only way to describe his political leanings is to call him anti-establishment. However, not just in the sense that he is against the elite, but just about any established group. He describes himself as a nihilist and as someone who actively avoids any sort of group, and I think this is an extension of his perverse view of the Constitution. In the end, his politics can really be summed up as any group wielding any power is bad because he tends to provoke aggression from everyone around him. Now, as stated before, Christian has a perverse view of the entire Constitution, and this includes his beliefs on self-defense. For Christian, anyone who begins to threaten his rights warrants escalation, or at least what he would perceive as matching force. Given who he is and how his beliefs function, this translates to believing that just about anyone who disagrees with him is trying to silence him, and therefore just about every interaction warrants escalation. Jeremy Christian is a complicated individual, one who is more than he appears on the surface. At first, this seems like simply a racist and hateful individual who is prone to violence. Beneath the surface, there's drug abuse and a hint at deep mental instability, one that only grew after his release from prison, one that his friends and family talk about, an isolated individual who believed that the world was out to get him, or that it was at least going to come to a horrible end. In a way, I think he did bring it to a horrible end. Now, I'm not Jeremy Christian, and I don't want to be, but I think this may be a decent look into his mentality, and hopefully this helps to explain why he could say it is hearing something as awful as, "Get out if you don't like free speech. You call it terrorism, I call it patriotism." Now, why did the attack occur? We already know that Christian is an unstable individual, prone to extreme fits of anger whenever he feels like someone or something is aggressing against him. Given this, I believe that this story really starts a couple months before the attack. In the time leading up to the incident, Christian had been supporting free speech movements and opposing left-wing extremist movements like Antifa. Given his feelings for the First Amendment, the free speech debate and the political atmosphere seems like something he would actively seek to join, and he did. However, his engagements with both sides show that he started to realize that most people didn't hold his extreme viewpoint on freedom of speech. His engagement in escalation against Antifa is most likely what caused him to become more and more extreme, going so far as to dress up like a Nazi and hail free speech in order to prove himself that his version of free speech did exist. When both sides started taking issue with his actions he put no context to, he would have seen his freedom of speech under attack as by both sides, evidence that he was the only true believer in free speech. The mixture of Christian's beliefs with the debate on free speech would have given him a consistent negative stimulus in his life, and a big one at that, considering how emotional he seems to get around the First Amendment. This, on top of the already existing issues, may have pushed him further into instability and mental breakdowns. The night before the attack, Christian was witnessed on another MAX train ranting about beheading the driver. Before he began making threats, he reportedly was talking on the phone about how he hated the city and about how he was pepper sprayed by some girl. And if he was pepper sprayed, I can only assume it's because he made the girl feel threatened in some way by his actions. However, all of this would push him further to act out. Last Friday, video footage shows Jeremy Christian drinking sangria out of a bladder before boarding a MAX train heading to Hollywood Transit Center, where he began a racist tirade towards two girls, one of whom was wearing a hijab. One passenger told Christian that he couldn't treat the women like that. Given Christian's ideology, this would be seen as someone threatening his rights, so Christian escalated and began arguing with several men. Christian suddenly moved towards Talisin Mirdan Namkai Mesh, who stood up in response. When Christian moved in close to Namkai Mesh, Micah Fletcher, who must have been seated nearby, stood up as well. Christian then shouted, "Do something," and pulled a folded knife out of his pocket, and shoved Fletcher, prompting Fletcher to retaliate by shoving Christian back. Christian then got knocked off balance and swung at Fletcher, unlocking the knife in the process and stabbing Fletcher in the neck. Christian then moved on Namkai Mesh, stabbing him twice. Ricky John Best then moved to intervene and was also stabbed in the neck. Christian then shoved Best into Namkai Mesh and stabbed both again. Christian then grabbed his belongings and fled to a nearby neighborhood, where he was arrested by police. Christian seemingly admitted that he aimed for their throats. Ricky John Best died at the scene, and Talisin Mirdan Namkai Mesh died of his wounds at the hospital. Micah Fletcher survived the attack and has gone on to speak out for the women who were the targets of Christian's harassment. Could this have been avoided? I think that, to start, this is an unfair question. It absolutely could have been avoided a number of different ways, but it wasn't, so there can only be changes to prevent this from happening again. Christian had clearly been displaying some violent rhetoric for months and had been known to be a violent criminal, and so it seems like he should have been treated as more of a threat. But the truth is that on the internet, anything that's ridiculous has just as much chance of being a joke as it has of being real. Now, his public actions seemingly crossed some lines, as he was pepper sprayed the day before the incident, and this, in addition to his record, should have given the indication that he was going to do something. But this runs into actually a rather big issue. If someone commits a crime in the past, that doesn't mean they're guilty of committing crimes in the future. And if someone starts acting up, even though they've committed crimes, again, it doesn't mean that they will. It just means that they're acting up for whatever reason. Now, there clearly was a problem with Christian, because multiple people seem to admit it. And so this is where I think the true issue comes in. So while it's obvious that Christian had mental issues, simply arresting someone for having mental issues isn't the way that things should be done. That would be creating a second class of citizens. So while I do think that Christian is responsible for this tragedy, the system we have to address is the system around mental health issues and the culture around it and how we respond. Many people around Christian seem to think that he had a problem. His mom said he had an addiction to marijuana, and Christian was treated for marijuana addiction. The problem is, I don't think he ever had marijuana addiction. An addiction like that makes the problem easy to address. It gives you a clear victory, and then you get to say that the problem is gone. But if the problem was never there, and you treated something that never existed, the problem is not gone. And so a system that looks at people and says, your problem is marijuana addiction, not deep-seated mental issues and a drug abuse problem that goes beyond marijuana, is one that will never address the true issues. And so expecting someone like Christian to see this within themselves may be an unrealistic expectation, but it can be on all of us to look to the people that we care about and look to the people around us to make sure that they aren't going off the deep end, to make sure that whether it means going out and getting someone the health care that they need, or voting on expanding health care, or simply sitting down and talking to someone, that there are things that we can do to try and bring these people back from the edge. Thank you for watching, and please join in on the conversation in the comments. If you thought this video was informative, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Sources are in the description down below. A link to Micah Fletcher's crowdfunding page for the girls Christian targeted is in the description as well.